She caught me at the door and said, "You don't knock anymore." I like that. And suddenly, everything between us changed. The mornings always began the same way. Walking past her house, I would catch the soft flicker of curtains moving, the faint clink of a coffee cup on the porch table, and sometimes, if I timed it just right, her warm smile greeting me through the window. It wasn't much, a nod, a wave, but it was enough to make my steps linger a little longer than usual. There was something quietly magnetic about her presence, a gentle assurance that made even the most ordinary day feel slightly extraordinary. Her movements were graceful, unhurried, as if she owned the air around her. The sunlight would catch the subtle highlights in her hair, framing her face in warmth, and I found myself memorizing the way she tilted her head when she laughed. Not the loud, dramatic laugh that fills a room, but the soft one that slips through quietly, leaving a trace of happiness lingering in its wake. It was a sound I began to crave, even though I had no right to. I often wondered if she noticed me, really noticed me, when I lingered on the sidewalk, pretending to tie my shoelaces or adjust my backpack. The briefest eye contact would send a flutter through my chest, a mixture of anticipation and hesitation. There was a subtle rhythm to these encounters, a dance of familiarity that didn't need words. Sometimes, she would step onto the porch just long enough to greet the morning, and I'd catch a whiff of her perfume, soft, floral, comforting, almost like the memory of spring itself. It wasn't just admiration, it was curiosity, an unspoken desire to know the life behind that poised exterior. I noticed the way she held her coffee cup with a kind of thoughtful care, or how she adjusted the edge of her cardigan, a gesture so small yet full of quiet elegance. These glimpses were private treasures, moments I collected in my mind like pages from a secret diary. Even in these small exchanges, a tension began to form, gentle, unspoken, as though the universe was teasing at something deeper. My heartbeat would quicken when our eyes met, just for a fraction of a second, and the air between us seemed charged with an invisible warmth. I could feel the beginning of something, fragile yet undeniable, taking shape in the silence of routine. By the time I walked away, I carried with me the lingering impression of her presence, the faintest brush of her smile against my memory, the subtle elegance of her gestures, and a quiet ache of wanting to be noticed in the same way she had noticed me, even if only for a fleeting moment. This was our world for now, simple, slow, and quietly electric. It started with the small, seemingly trivial errands that somehow always led me to her doorstep. Today, it was borrowing sugar, or at least that's what I told myself. The truth was, I was looking for any excuse to cross the threshold of her garden gate, to exist, even briefly, in the space she inhabited. She was out watering her flowers, the sun glinting off the spray of water as it caught in the breeze, sparkling like tiny diamonds. She didn't notice me immediately, or perhaps she chose not to. Either way, the moment I stepped closer, the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of us. She turned, catching sight of me with that soft, knowing smile that made my chest tighten in the best way. "Oh, hello," she said, her voice casual yet carrying a warmth that made it impossible to sound ordinary. It was just a greeting, but the way she said it made me forget for a second that I had an excuse to be here at all. Her eyes met mine, steady and attentive, and I felt a flicker of something unspoken pass between us. As she handed me the sugar, our hands brushed, briefly, lightly, but long enough for a jolt of electricity to pulse through me. I lingered just a heartbeat longer than necessary, feeling the warmth of her palm against mine. There was no urgency, no overt flirtation, yet something in the touch made the air feel charged, like the quiet calm before a storm. My gaze involuntarily traced the lines of her hand, noting the elegance of her fingers, the subtle strength beneath the softness. We moved into casual conversation, talk of weather, of gardens, of nothing in particular, but the rhythm of our words was different now, slower, measured, as though we were both aware of the silent tension threading between us. I found myself leaning slightly closer, drawn not by necessity but by the magnetic pull of her presence. Her laughter, soft and low, seemed to settle over me like a comforting blanket, and I realized I had been holding my breath without noticing. Even when I finally stepped back, sugar in hand, there was a lingering hesitation in my movements. Our eyes met again, longer this time, and I sensed the same curiosity reflected in her gaze that had been quietly growing in mine. She was a puzzle I wanted to solve, not with words, but with moments like this, fleeting, intimate, and suspended in time. Walking away, I carried the memory of that brief touch, the warmth of her smile, and the subtle pull of connection that seemed to grow stronger each time our paths crossed. It wasn't yet love, not even attraction in its fullest sense, but it was enough to make me anticipate the next unexpected encounter. It started with the smallest of conversations. A question about a book left on her porch, or a comment about the way her roses were blooming, nothing extraordinary, really, but the way she responded made it feel like an entirely different world had opened up just for me. She didn't talk at me, she talked with me, and that distinction was everything. Her voice carried warmth, calmness, and a kind of confidence that made it easy to forget the boundaries I had set for myself. One afternoon, I lingered by her garden, helping her adjust a trellis that had loosened in the wind. As I worked, she leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing mine ever so lightly. It was accidental, or maybe intentional, but the contact sent a shiver up my spine, grounding me in the moment. She spoke softly about her day, her voice lilting in a rhythm I felt more than I heard. Every word she said seemed to carry layers I wanted to unravel, stories hinted at between the sentences. At one point, she paused, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and glanced at me with a subtle, searching look. It was in that moment I noticed the little things, the quiet strength in her posture, the gentle curve of her smile when she laughed at something I said, the way her eyes seemed to hold both wisdom and vulnerability simultaneously. I realized I was leaning in slightly, drawn toward the comfort of her presence, the warmth that radiated without effort. She shared a story about her past, something small yet personal, a memory of a life lived fully, yet tinged with regret. I listened, captivated, as her words painted images more vivid than any picture. I felt a deep sense of connection forming, a shared understanding that we were both walking through this moment with an unspoken acknowledgement of its significance. There was a silence after the story, a pause that stretched comfortably between us. In that quiet, our proximity felt charged. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the earthiness of the garden, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, the subtle warmth radiating from her hand when she rested it near mine. It was a silence filled with unspoken words, a tension both delicate and exhilarating. By the time I left her garden, my thoughts were tangled with images of her gestures, her laughter, and the gentle way she had shared herself with me. What had started as a casual conversation had transformed into something deeper, a recognition of connection, trust, and a slow building of intimacy that neither of us could fully name yet. The pull between us was no longer subtle, it was a quiet force, urging me to return, to listen, and to notice every detail of the woman I was slowly coming to care for. It happened almost without warning. I was helping her carry a basket of freshly laundered clothes from the line to the porch, laughing at our clumsy coordination as we stepped over the uneven stones. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden glow over her garden, turning every leaf into a tiny flicker of light. And then, in the midst of that ordinary moment, it happened, a touch that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't anticipated. Her hand brushed against mine as she steadied the basket. Just a fleeting contact, yet I felt the warmth of her skin linger far longer than it should have. I didn't pull away immediately, and neither did she. Instead, there was a subtle pause, a gentle recognition of the moment we were sharing. Her eyes met mine, soft and knowing, and in that gaze, I sensed an unspoken acknowledgement, we both felt it. That quiet electricity, delicate yet undeniable, had passed between us. I tried to focus on the basket, to let the touch be nothing more than accidental, but my thoughts betrayed me. I was acutely aware of the brush of her fingers, the subtle strength in her grip, and the comforting steadiness she exuded even in something as mundane as carrying laundry. My heart beat faster, but not from fear, something warmer, more vulnerable, something thrilling in its simplicity. She smiled, a small, almost shy curve of her lips that seemed to mirror the flutter in my chest. "Careful," she said softly, her voice carrying that familiar warmth. But there was an edge to it now, a gentle teasing that hadn't been there before. I felt a magnetic pull to stay closer, to linger in her presence a moment longer, yet neither of us spoke of it. Words would have broken the delicate tension that had formed like sunlight dancing on water. Even as the basket was set down on the porch, I noticed her fingers linger near mine, just a hair's breadth apart, as though reluctant to fully separate. The subtle physicality, entirely innocent yet intimate, left me acutely conscious of her proximity. I could feel her presence in the space around me, the warmth radiating from her, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the evening air, the gentle rhythm of her breathing. Walking home later, I couldn't shake the sensation of that touch. It was more than a simple contact, it was a revelation, a moment of connection that had shifted something inside both of us. I realized then that our bond was changing, moving beyond casual greetings and fleeting conversations into a territory neither of us had fully mapped, but both of us were quietly, irresistibly drawn toward. It was one of those evenings that felt suspended in time, the sky painted in the soft purples and pinks of twilight. I found myself at her doorstep again, ostensibly to help with a broken chair in her living room, though I knew the real reason was far simpler, I wanted to be near her. She welcomed me inside with that same quiet warmth that had begun to feel like home. The familiar scent of her perfume lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of vanilla from the candle flickering on the table. As we worked together, her hand brushed mine occasionally, each contact more deliberate than before. But it wasn't just the touches, it was the way she shared herself that made the moment so intense. Midway through our small task, she paused, sinking onto the edge of her sofa with a sigh that carried something heavier than fatigue. "It's been a lonely time," she admitted softly, her voice catching slightly. She looked away for a moment, eyes tracing some invisible pattern on the floor, before meeting mine again with quiet honesty. Her vulnerability struck me in a way I hadn't anticipated. There was no dramatics, no over-explanation, just the simple, unguarded truth of her feelings. And in that honesty, I felt a bridge forming between us, one built on trust, shared space, and the subtle intimacy of being truly seen. I moved closer, instinctively offering reassurance, not with words, but with presence. My hand rested near hers, hovering just above the arm of the sofa, and she didn't pull away. Instead, there was a slow, deliberate ease in her posture, as if the silence itself could communicate more than words ever could. We stayed like that for a moment, the quiet hum of the evening wrapping around us. I felt the gentle warmth radiating from her, the subtle weight of her gaze on me, and the way her breathing seemed to slow when our hands nearly touched. I noticed how her hair fell across her shoulders in soft waves, how the candlelight flickered across her face, illuminating the contours that I had memorized in glimpses over the past weeks. It was a confession without expectation, an acknowledgement of her humanity and the emotions she had carried alone for so long. And in that vulnerable honesty, I found myself opening too, my chest tightening with a mixture of tenderness, concern, and something more, a quiet awareness of the slow-blooming connection that was beginning to define us. By the time I left, the world outside her door felt slightly different. There was a new weight to our interactions, a shared understanding that neither of us could quite name yet, but both of us felt. The intimacy wasn't loud, it wasn't overt, but it was profound. And in that soft, unspoken moment, I realized that our bond was shifting irrevocably, moving deeper into trust, care, and something dangerously, beautifully tender. The evening had that perfect, almost cinematic quality, where the sky was streaked with gold and amber, and the world seemed to hold its breath in quiet anticipation. I found myself sitting on her porch, the wooden boards warm beneath me from the fading sun, while she moved with that familiar grace around the space. The garden, her sanctuary, smelled faintly of lavender and earth, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze created a delicate, private soundtrack to the moment. We didn't speak much at first. The silence between us had become comfortable, almost comforting, filled with a tension that was subtle but undeniably present. Our knees brushed occasionally, light, almost accidental touches that made my heart rate quicken. I caught her glance, slow and deliberate, as if she were measuring my thoughts without words. There was something in her eyes, a spark, a quiet acknowledgement, that made me acutely aware of the space between us, of the invisible thread pulling us closer. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her hair catching the last light of day, and for a moment, I noticed the vulnerability in the tilt of her head, the softness in her expression that made her seem both confident and quietly human. Then she spoke, almost in passing, but with a weight that hung in the air between us, "You don't knock anymore." I like that. The simplicity of her words hit me harder than I expected. There was no flirtation, no overt suggestion, just a subtle acknowledgement of the closeness that had grown between us. And yet, in that quiet sentence, I felt the depth of our connection, the mutual recognition of desire, tempered with restraint, respect, and an understanding of the world outside this porch. I looked at her, noting the gentle curve of her lips, the soft warmth in her eyes, and the way she seemed to occupy the space fully and effortlessly. Her presence was grounding and electric at the same time, and the subtle tension in the air felt like a current passing silently between us. I felt my chest tighten, a slow, steady ache of wanting, tempered by the knowledge that this connection was fragile, delicate, and entirely ours. We sat like that for a long while, breathing in the same quiet evening, feeling the closeness without needing to define it. Each small gesture, the brush of a hand, the shared glance, the gentle incline of her shoulder toward mine, spoke volumes. Desire was there, yes, but it was muted, respectful, and infinitely more intoxicating because of it. The moment wasn't about consummation, it was about recognition, silent, mutual, and achingly beautiful. As the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky awash in twilight, I realized that our bond had reached a threshold. We both felt it, knew it, and understood it. The desire between us wasn't explosive or demanding, it was patient, simmering, and profoundly alive, waiting for the right time, in the right way, to fully reveal itself. The evening had settled into a gentle quiet, the kind that only comes after the sun has fully dipped below the horizon. The porch glowed softly in the last amber light, and the world beyond her garden seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of us in a space that felt suspended, private, and intimate. I found myself sitting a little closer to her than usual, the warm wooden boards beneath us a subtle comfort, and the scent of her perfume mingling with the fading warmth of the day. She was quiet at first, her gaze tracing the lines of the horizon, yet the tilt of her head toward me, the soft exhale of her breath, spoke volumes. Our hands brushed lightly, lingering this time without any pretense of accident. The touch was gentle, deliberate, and it carried the weight of all the unspoken words and quiet desires that had built between us. I felt the warmth of her fingers, the reassuring steadiness in her grasp, and the slow, grounding rhythm of her presence beside me. We didn't need to speak. The conversation had happened over weeks of fleeting touches, shared silences, and the subtle tension of proximity. Each glance, each soft brush of skin against skin, had carried its own language, one that neither of us had rushed to translate but had both understood fully. In that quiet, I felt a sense of completion, a bond strengthened not by grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but by patience, mutual respect, and the tender understanding that had grown naturally between us. She shifted slightly, leaning her head gently against my shoulder. The warmth of her hair brushed against me, a softness that seemed to linger longer than the moment itself. I felt her exhale, slow and steady, and it was as though her breath carried the trust, the vulnerability, and the quiet joy that had been building between us. I rested my hand over hers, fingers intertwining naturally, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. It was just us, just this gentle closeness, a shared heartbeat in perfect rhythm. The age gap, the whispers of societal expectations, even the small hesitations we had carried, all of it seemed to fade in the presence of this quiet intimacy. We didn't need to define it further, it was enough to simply exist together, to share a moment of pure, heartfelt connection that acknowledged both our desire and our restraint. As the twilight deepened into night, I realized that this was the resolution our slow-burn romance deserved, not a dramatic declaration, but a warm, enduring intimacy built on trust, subtle affection, and the steady blossoming of something rare and profound. In the gentle press of her hand against mine, in the quiet brush of her hair, and in the peaceful silence we shared, I finally understood the depth of what had been growing between us all along, a bond that was tender, respectful, and perfectly complete. And if this quiet, slow-burning connection left your heart racing even a little, don't miss the full story. The link is in the description. Come see how it all unfolds.